We repair the barricades at these two intersections.
All right.
In 1986, a 31-year-old director walked into 20th Century Fox with no reel, no reputation, and no backup plan. He picked up a marker, wrote the word alien on a whiteboard, added an S at the end, and then turned that letter into a $sign. That was the pitch. That was the entire pitch for what would become one of the most legendary sequels ever made. The studio said yes, and then everything went wrong. The production nearly collapsed 3 separate times before a single frame reached theaters. And yet somehow, Aliens became a masterpiece. It earned over $130 million worldwide. But here's the thing. The Aliens version audiences saw in 1986 was not the original film James Cameron made. Fox executives had slashed nearly an hour of footage before release. Entire scenes were banned. Alternate endings were buried, and some of the most shocking truths about what happened behind the cameras have never been fully told till this day. This is the real story of Aliens. 20 revelations the studio never wanted you to see. Number 1. Cameron pitched the entire movie with a $sign.
He says he's on to something. Wants to know if his claim will be on it.
Why wouldn't his claim be on it?
Most directors walk into a studio pitch meeting with concept art, character breakdowns, and a polished treatment that took months to assemble. James Cameron walked into 20th Century Fox with a whiteboard marker and about 5 seconds of material. He wrote the word alien on the board. Then he added an S at the end. Then he drew 2 vertical lines through that letter, turning it into a $sign. Alien with a $sign. That was the pitch. No script, no visual deck, no detailed outline of the world he planned to build. Just one word, one letter, and a promise that this sequel would print money. What makes this moment even more unbelievable is who Cameron was at the time. His only real directing credit was The Terminator, which had been a hit in the United States, but had not yet been released in the United Kingdom, where Aliens would be entirely filmed. To the British crew waiting at Pinewood Studios, Cameron was a complete unknown. A young American nobody with exactly 1 movie and an attitude that suggested he had made 10. The budget Fox approved was approximately $18.5 million. He was following Ridley Scott with a sequel that would abandon slow, atmospheric horror entirely in favor of loud, aggressive military action. Every experienced person in the room told him it was a no-win situation. If the movie succeeded, Scott would get the credit. If it failed, Cameron would take all the blame. That level of reckless confidence either destroys a career or builds a legend. In Cameron's case, it did both at different points during production, which we revealed in number 16, before permanently settling on legend. Number 2. The Marines went through real military boot camp.
We sat down on LV-426. One of our crew members was brought back on board with...
James Cameron did not want actors pretending to be soldiers. He wanted actors who had been broken down and rebuilt into something close to the real thing. Before cameras ever rolled, Cameron sent the entire Marine cast through an intensive military-style training program designed to simulate the stress, exhaustion, and group bonding of actual combat preparation. The man running the operation was Matthews, who played Sergeant Apone in the film and was himself a real Vietnam veteran. The training covered weapons handling, squad movement, communication under pressure, and the kind of physical conditioning that left actors sore for days. Cameron insisted on this because he understood something most action directors in the 1980s did not. Audiences can feel the difference between actors holding props and actors who know how to carry weapons. The way a person shoulders a rifle, the way they check corners, the way they move as a unit instead of a collection of individuals. All of that registers subconsciously, even if the viewer cannot explain why one movie feels authentic and another feels like a costume party. But here is the detail that changes everything. Cameron deliberately excluded Sigourney Weaver from the training. He did not want Ripley to feel like part of the group. He wanted her isolated. When Weaver walked onto set for the first time with the Marine cast, they had already spent weeks building real relationships, real inside jokes, real physical comfort with each other and their equipment. Weaver had none of that. The awkwardness you see on screen when Ripley first meets the Marines is not entirely performed. She genuinely was the outsider walking into an established unit. That tension cost nothing to manufacture, and it is one of the most effective character dynamics in the entire film. Number 3. The whole film was a secret Vietnam War allegory. On the surface, Aliens looks like the ultimate popcorn action movie. But underneath every firefight and every panicked retreat sits a political argument James Cameron embedded. Aliens is a Vietnam War allegory. In fact, Cameron had confirmed this in multiple interviews over the decades. The Colonial Marines represent the American military machine of the late 1960s. They arrive on LV-426 with overwhelming technological superiority, absolute confidence in their firepower, and zero understanding of the enemy they are about to face. The xenomorphs, by contrast, have no technology at all. What they have is total knowledge of the terrain, relentless aggression, and a willingness to absorb losses that no conventional military strategy can account for. And here's the thing, the parallels run through every level of the film. Lieutenant Gorman, the commanding officer, is inexperienced and panics under pressure, representing military leadership disconnected from the reality on the ground. Burke represents the corporate interests that profited from sending young people into conflicts they did not fully understand. Even the structure of the combat sequences mirrors Vietnam War film conventions. The truth is, George Lucas had played with similar ideas in Return of the Jedi, where the technologically superior Empire loses to the low-tech Ewoks. But Cameron went further in this one. He did not soften the message with fantasy. He built it into the bones of a blockbuster and let the audience carry it home without a lecture. Number 4. The Xenomorph Hive became the Joker's origin story. Building the alien colony complex from scratch would have eaten through the budget before Cameron even reached the third act. The production needed an existing location with the right scale, the right industrial atmosphere, and the right level of decay to sell the idea of a functioning human colony overrun by something monstrous. They found it at the Acton Lane Power Station in West London. Cameron chose the location specifically because of its raised catwalks and its raw visual weight. His crew spent weeks dressing the interior with biomechanical resin, alien eggs, and cocooned colonist dummies to transform the power station into the Xenomorph Hive. The red metal railings lining the walkways became part of the film's visual identity. When filming wrapped, the production essentially abandoned the set. Number 5. The weapons were Frankenstein builds from World War II. Every weapon the Colonial Marines carry in Aliens looks like it was manufactured 2 centuries in the future. None of them were. Every single firearm on screen was built from pieces of real military hardware, some of it dating back to the Second World War, stitched together by armorers working under brutal time and budget constraints. The M41A pulse rifle was constructed by combining a Thompson submachine gun with the forend of a Franchi Spaz 12 shotgun and components from a Remington 870 pump-action shotgun. The production team selected their base weapons specifically for reliability when firing blanks. The flamethrower units were functional enough that Sigourney Weaver later admitted the weapons required serious care during handling to avoid accidentally igniting a stuntman on set. But the detail that separates Aliens from every other sci-fi action film of the 1980s is what happened after filming wrapped. Cameron spent 2 full days in post-production with his sound engineering team constructing a single sound effect, the firing sound of the pulse rifle. 2 days for one gun. That obsessive attention to audio detail is why the pulse rifle sounds different from every other movie weapon. It does not sound like a prop. It sounds like industrial machinery tearing through metal. Number 6. Cameron fired the cinematographer over a lighting war. The original cinematographer on Aliens was a veteran named Dick Bush, and from the moment production began at Pinewood Studios, Bush and Cameron were at war over how the film should look. Cameron wanted darkness. He wanted the alien hive to feel suffocating, claustrophobic, and nearly impossible to see clearly because fear lives in what the audience cannot fully make out. Bush disagreed completely. He kept lighting the nest brightly, flooding the set with illumination to show off the intricate details of the production design. His argument was not unreasonable. The crew had spent enormous effort building those sets, and Bush believed audiences deserved to see them. But Cameron understood something Bush did not. Showing the audience everything kills the terror. The disagreement was not a polite creative discussion. It became a full-blown production conflict that held up the shooting schedule for weeks and pushed an already tight budget closer to the edge. Cameron and producer Gail Ann Hurd made the decision to fire Bush. The response from the British crew was immediate and hostile. Several crew members walked off set in solidarity with Bush, viewing his firing as proof that Cameron was an arrogant outsider who did not respect the experience of the people around him. Hurd had to personally convince the crew to return. Number 7. Actors were forced to breathe toxic fumes on set. Here's a shocking truth that sounds unbelievable. During filming of several key sequences, actual toxic chemicals were burned on set to create atmospheric smoke effects. Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein, and Michael Biehn were asked to hold their breath during takes while hazardous fumes filled the air around them. This was not a carefully managed safety protocol. This was a 1986 film set operating under pressure, behind schedule, and pushing through sequences that required visible atmosphere at a pace that left little room for caution. The irony is difficult to ignore, but the chemical fumes were only one piece of the physical chaos. The interior set for the APC partially collapsed during filming and grazed Sigourney Weaver. The production's lead actress was nearly injured by a falling set piece. Number 8. The knife trick was never in the script, and Paxton was never told. Here's the thing. The knife trick scene, where the android Bishop rapidly stabs a blade between spread fingers while Hudson's hand is pinned underneath, was not in James Cameron's original shooting script. Cameron came up with the idea on set on the day it was filmed. He discussed the concept with Lance Henriksen, who played Bishop, and they mapped out the choreography together. Cameron then walked through the scene with the rest of the cast. Every single person on set knew what was coming except one, Bill Paxton. Cameron deliberately withheld the full details from Paxton because he wanted something no amount of acting training can replicate: real fear. He wanted the shock on Hudson's face to be genuine. When the cameras rolled, Paxton had no clear idea how fast Henriksen would actually go or exactly where the blade would land relative to his fingers. What you see on screen is Bill Paxton actually nervous, actually uncertain, actually hoping his co-star's hand-eye coordination was as good as everyone claimed. Number 9. Sigourney Weaver detested guns and almost refused the role. Sigourney Weaver was not just uncomfortable with guns. She was an active gun control advocate who donated money to anti-gun legislation, publicly supported disarmament causes, and once said she did not even watch movies that featured firearms. When Cameron's script for Aliens arrived, Weaver read it quickly, absorbing the story and the emotional arcs, but admitting later that she skimmed past many of the stage directions. Those directions contained a lot of guns. Ripley's entire third act is built around strapping heavy weaponry to her body and marching into a hive to rescue a child. When Weaver arrived on set and saw the actual prop weapons for the first time, she told Cameron directly that she was for gun control and would not be picking up a gun and doing anything with it. This was not a negotiation tactic. This was a woman who had accepted a $1 million paycheck, a 30-fold increase from her alien salary of roughly $33,000, and was now standing on a multi-million-dollar set, telling the director she would not do a fundamental part of the job. Cameron's response was not to argue. It was to take her to a firing range. He put real weapons in her hands under controlled conditions and let the experience speak for itself. Weaver later admitted, with visible discomfort in interviews, that firing the weapons was, unfortunately, very addictive. Number 10. Cameron bluffed with Schwarzenegger's agent to lock Weaver's contract. Here is something most people do not realize about Aliens. The entire film nearly died before a single frame was shot, not because of creative differences or budget problems, but because of a contract negotiation that turned into a high-stakes poker game between a desperate director and a Hollywood agency. Sigourney Weaver was not automatically attached to the sequel. Fox had included an option clause in her original Alien contract, but by the time Aliens entered pre-production, the 7-year rule had kicked in, which meant the option was legally unenforceable. Weaver was a free agent. She could walk away entirely, and without Ripley there was no movie worth making. Cameron knew this. Fox knew this, and Weaver's agents absolutely knew this, which is why they asked for the moon. The salary demand was significant enough that Fox executives told Cameron flatly they would not pay it and suggested he begin developing a version of the script without Ripley. Cameron refused. He was not willing to gut his own story, but he also was not willing to lose the film entirely. So he did something brilliantly manipulative. He called Arnold Schwarzenegger's agent, a man named Lou Pitt, and loudly announced that he loved his Alien script and that he could easily rewrite it without Sigourney Weaver and still be proud of the result. Cameron chose Lou Pitt for one very specific reason. Pitt worked at the exact same talent agency as Weaver's representative. The offices were in the same building. Cameron was banking on the fact that a rumor about replacing the franchise's lead actress with a completely different direction would travel across the hallway before the end of the business day. It did. Within hours, Weaver's team received the signal that their client was in danger of being written out of a major studio sequel. The entire calculation changed. The deal closed within 12 hours. Number 11. The original Hicks was arrested buying drugs from an undercover cop. Before Michael Biehn ever set foot on the Pinewood Studios lot, someone else had already been playing Corporal Hicks for 2 weeks. His name was James Remar. He was known for intense roles in films like The Warriors and 48 Hours. Remar started shooting. He trained with the cast. He wore the armor. He filmed scenes. And then the London police got involved. Remar was arrested after purchasing what producer Gail Ann Hurd later identified as a speedball, a mixture of heroin and cocaine, from an undercover police officer. The official story released to the press at the time described his departure as artistic differences, which is the phrase Hollywood uses when the real explanation would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Remar himself eventually confirmed the truth publicly years later, admitting he had a terrible drug problem during that period of his life and was fired after being busted for possession. The legal situation was severe. British drug laws at the time carried potential sentences of 8 to 10 years for the charges Remar faced. The production's legal team intervened and managed to get him deported back to the United States rather than face prosecution in England. Number 12. The first rough cut ran over 3 hours long. The version of Aliens that audiences saw was 137 minutes long. That is not the film James Cameron made. Cameron's first rough assembly ran for approximately 195 minutes. 3 hours and 15 minutes of footage assembled into a complete narrative before a single executive note was applied. Roughly 58 minutes of material was removed during the editing process. Years later, some of that footage was eventually rescued. In 1991, Cameron released the Special Edition, which restored approximately 17 minutes of deleted scenes back into the film. That version runs 154 minutes and includes material that fundamentally changes the emotional texture of the story. The full Hadley's Hope colony sequences showing everyday life before the xenomorph attack were restored. The automated sentry gun scenes showing the Marines' ammunition counting down toward zero were put back. Extended dialogue deepening the relationship between Ripley and Hicks returned. Additional scenes laying out Burke's corporate motivations far more explicitly were reinserted. But even the Special Edition does not contain everything Cameron shot. Dozens of scenes remain unreleased to this day. Number 13. Ripley's daughter was erased from the theatrical cut. Of all the scenes Fox executives removed from Aliens before its 1986 release, one deletion changed the emotional meaning of the entire film more than any other. In Cameron's original cut, shortly after Ripley wakes from 57 years of hypersleep, she has a conversation with Carter Burke in which she asks about her daughter. Burke reveals that Amanda Ripley grew up, lived a full life, and died at the age of 66, while her mother floated unconscious through space. Ripley is shown a photograph of Amanda as an elderly woman. That photograph used in the scene is not a stock image or a random actress. It is a real photograph of Sigourney Weaver's actual mother, which gives the moment a layer of emotional reality that purely fictional props almost never carry. Fox cut the scene because executives believed it slowed the film's momentum. They wanted the audience moving toward the Marines and the action as quickly as possible. Number 14. Carter Burke got a death scene that was left out of every official cut. Paul Reiser's Carter Burke is one of the most despised villains in science fiction history, and his fate in the theatrical cut of Aliens is deliberately ambiguous. The last time audiences see him, he is separated from the group during the xenomorph assault, and the film simply moves on without confirming what happened to him. In the deleted footage, Ripley is searching through the alien hive looking for Newt when she discovers Burke cocooned to a wall. He is alive. Barely. His body is encased in the same biomechanical resin that covers every surface of the hive, and he is conscious enough to realize what is happening to him. A chest burster is already moving inside his body. He can feel it. Burke reaches out toward Ripley and begs for help. Ripley's response is to hand Burke a grenade. Then she walks away. She leaves him alone in the darkness with a weapon and a choice, knowing exactly what he will have to do. Cameron filmed the scene. He edited the scene. And then he cut it, permanently. The reason was not squeamishness or studio pressure. Cameron realized during post-production that the scene contained a continuity error he could not fix. Number 15. A tea lady nearly destroyed the entire film. Production on Aliens took place primarily at Pinewood Studios in England, a facility with deep roots in British filmmaking tradition and an equally deep commitment to union-mandated work practices. Among those practices were tea breaks. Twice a day, at 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, a woman would wheel a tea trolley onto the set. Work stopped. Everyone stopped. The massive stage doors would swing open to allow the cart through, and in the process, hours of carefully built special effects smoke would pour out of the soundstage and vanish into the English air. Entire setups would have to be rebuilt from scratch. James Cameron watched this happen repeatedly and reportedly came close to physically confronting the elderly woman who was simply doing her job. It was so bad that he considered moving the entire production out of England. Number 16. The entire crew walked off set and nearly killed Cameron's career. The tea breaks were the symptom. The real disease was a fundamental clash between two completely incompatible working cultures, and it finally exploded into a crisis that came within hours of destroying James Cameron's career before it truly began. The breaking point centered on Derek Cracknell, the first assistant director assigned to the production by Pinewood Studios. He believed he was more qualified to direct the film than the young American who had been handed the job. When Cameron would set up a shot and give specific instructions, Cracknell would override them. Producer Gail Ann Hurd later described the dynamic with barely contained frustration, saying Cameron would ask him to set up a shot one way, and Cracknell would say, "Oh, no, I know what you want," and then do it wrong, forcing the entire setup to be broken down and rebuilt. Regardless, the crew sided with Cracknell because he was one of them. Cameron was the outsider. When Cameron and Hurd finally made the decision to fire Cracknell, the response was immediate. The entire Pinewood crew walked off set in the middle of the day. Every single person. The stages went dark. The production stopped. And in that silence, Cameron and Hurd faced a terrifying calculation. Fox had already spent millions on a film that was now sitting motionless inside an empty soundstage in England. If the crew did not return, the studio would almost certainly pull the plug. Cameron could not relocate the production to Los Angeles at this stage. The sets were built. The locations were locked. Everything was in England. If Fox killed the film, Cameron and Hurd were finished in Hollywood. This was not a hypothetical risk. This was the actual situation on the ground. The person who saved everything was Sigourney Weaver. She was respected by both sides. The crew liked her. Cameron trusted her. She personally brokered a peace between the director and the mutinous crew, facilitating a meeting that eventually brought everyone back to work. Number 17. Newt was found in a school cafeteria and never acted again. Somewhere inside the hundreds of auditions Cameron conducted for the role of Newt, there was a pattern he could not escape. Child after child delivered lines with the polished confidence of kids trained for commercials and television. They hit their marks, delivered their dialogue, and then immediately did the one thing that disqualified every single one of them. They smiled. It is what commercial work teaches children to do. Finish the line, flash the grin, move on to the next take. But this time, Cameron was not looking for charm. He was casting a girl who had survived alone inside an alien-infested colony for months, hiding in air ducts and eating scraps while every adult around her was taken or killed. That character does not smile. That character holds the fear in her face long after the words stop. Approximately 500 children auditioned. Carrie Henn was the only one who did not break the moment. She had no acting experience whatsoever. She had never been on a set, never taken a class, never appeared in front of a camera professionally. She was 9 years old. On set, Henn and Weaver formed a bond that went beyond professional performance. Number 18. The alien queen was built from garbage bags in a parking lot. Nothing like the queen had ever been attempted in practical effects. Cameron wanted a creature that stood 14 feet tall, moved with organic fluidity, had 4 arms operating independently, and could physically interact with Sigourney Weaver in full-frame shots without any post-production digital manipulation. In 1986, CGI was not an option for a production with an $18.5 million budget. Everything had to be real. Everything had to be in the room. To achieve this, Winston's team built a crude wireframe structure large enough to hold 2 people, covered it in black garbage bags and foam, attached monster hands Winston had been developing for another project, added legs with puppeteering rods, and hung the entire contraption from a crane in the parking lot of Winston's Los Angeles studio. 2 stuntmen climbed inside. The team shot video and photographs of the test to analyze what kind of mobility they could achieve. The result was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It looked like exactly what it was: 2 men dangling inside a trash bag skeleton in a parking lot. But it moved. It swayed with an organic irregularity that mechanical rigs alone could never produce. Human operators inside a creature give it the subtle inconsistencies of real life, the tiny weight shifts and hesitations that tell the audience's brain, this thing is alive. Number 19. The composer called it a nightmare and wrote the climax overnight. James Horner arrived in London with a plan. He had been hired to compose the score for Aliens and expected approximately 6 weeks to write, orchestrate, and record the music. On paper, 6 weeks was reasonable for a film of this scale. It was enough time to watch the finished film multiple times, identify the emotional beats, develop themes, write variations, and deliver a polished orchestral score worthy of a major studio release. In reality, none of that happened. When Horner arrived, he discovered that Cameron was still editing the film. The movie was not finished. He could not watch it. He could not begin composing because there was no locked picture to compose against. For 3 weeks, Horner had no choice but to visit the editing rooms and the sets, watching fragments of footage while editor Ray Lovejoy struggled to keep pace with Cameron's relentless schedule. When Horner was occasionally given footage to work with, he would write music carefully timed to specific scenes. Then Cameron would recut the film overnight, changing the duration and rhythm of sequences Horner had already scored. The relationship deteriorated rapidly. Horner believed Cameron was more concerned with sound effects than with the musical score, pointing to the fact that Cameron spent 2 full days with his sound engineer perfecting the firing sound of the pulse rifle, while the composer waited for a finished film that kept changing shape. Producer Gail Ann Hurd made the situation worse during a confrontation in which she essentially threatened to replace Horner if he could not deliver on the compressed timeline. Horner's response was sharp. He told Hurd that if she could find another composer willing to work under these conditions, she was welcome to try. Number 20. Sigourney Weaver made Oscar history, and the snub changed Cameron forever. Aliens landed in theaters on July 18, 1986, and detonated. The film opened at number 1 in the United States with a weekend gross of just over $10 million across 1,437 theaters. By the end of its domestic run, Aliens had earned approximately $85 million in North America alone. Internationally, the total climbed to somewhere around $183 million. The production had cost approximately $18.5 million. The return on investment was staggering by any standard. The film received 7 Academy Award nominations at the 59th ceremony. It won 2 for Best Sound Effects Editing and Best Visual Effects. Stan Winston's Alien Queen was officially recognized as one of the greatest practical effects achievements ever put on screen, but the nomination that shook the industry was Best Actress for Sigourney Weaver. In 1987, the Academy did not take science fiction seriously. Genre films were considered spectacle, not art. Action performances were dismissed as physical stunts rather than emotional craft. For Weaver to receive a Best Actress nomination for playing Ellen Ripley in a film filled with gunfire, explosions, and alien creatures was a cultural milestone that signaled something shifting inside the institution itself. Now we want to hear from you. Which Aliens version is the real masterpiece? The one Fox released, or the one Cameron fought for? Maybe the answer is both. We want to know your thoughts in the comments. If this video changed the way you see Aliens, subscribe and turn on notifications because we are just getting started. The next one goes even deeper.